Hey everyone, welcome to the stream. It's been a little while since I've been live streaming, but I'm glad to be back. This is Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and as always, after you watch me, you can decide for yourself if I am in fact coding it wrong. Well, today we've got a one-off live stream working on an open source library, a very tiny one that we're going to make a bit bigger. Then in January, we've got a series coming up converting a link sharing app that I've created as a side project over to use React Native Web. I had really great experience with Expo building a React Native app for mobile and for web, and so we're going to do the same with a second project of mine. And we're going to look through a lot of lessons learned that I had from the first project for how to get the same app running great on mobile and on web. So let's take a look at what we're doing today. We're going to run for about an hour, maybe a bit longer. We'll see. Whether you're joining live or in the recording later, I'm glad you're here. If you're live, say hey in the chat and let's be in touch as we go through this. All right, let's take a look here. So we want to get responsive design working on React Native. And so I'll show an example of that. I just have a really trivial example. I mean, responsive design could be anything related to detecting and responding to the look and feel of the app. Responding to the dimensions of the device that you're on. So we can see here I've got a sample app on a small phone that says red on small phones, blue on big phones. And then on a bigger phone, which is to say like a normal, typical phone size now, just a plain iPhone 13, the text shows as blue on there. I've got the same app running on the web because this is again running with Expo with React Native Web. And we can see that as we resize the width of the window, this styles update automatically. When it's wide enough, it says it's blue, and when it's small enough, it's red, and it's also a smaller font size. So anything in the app we might want to style to respond in this way. For example, here's Shirley, my to-do list app running here, and check out the buttons here on this screen. When we're on a wider device, the buttons are sort of in a row. We sometimes even have a sidebar. And then when the screen gets narrow enough, the buttons go to a stack, as is more typical on a phone. So responsively, we change the direction. So React Native has the ability to respond to font sizes, to screen sizes built in, but the API for it's kind of cumbersome. So let's take a look at the API that me and a coworker put together as a result of as part of the initial proposal for this library. It's called React Native Style Queries. Here's the proposal repo for it. This is public, so you can see this, and you can use the first version of this app, this library, if you want. I'd hold off because we're going to redo the API today. So if you take a look at this, let me zoom in the font size. You can see some media queries you might be familiar with on the web that say, hey, if the font size is, if the text size is, sorry, I'm getting distracted by making sure my volume level is correct. I've got a new microphone set up here. That's cool. Let me zoom down there. I talk loud. Cool. If you're in the chat, let me know if I talk too loud or if it's okay. Cool. So, in media queries on the web, you can specify, hey, for a minimum width of 600 pixels, apply these. Oh, I see there's even an error in how I've set this up, but whatever. Using Sass, it could work like this. You say the text is font size 14, but on a screen of a minimum width of 600 pixels, the font size should be 16 instead. So React Native has some more cumbersome ways to do this with conditionals. So we want to propose a nice API for doing it. And here's what we proposed initially is to say, hey, for style queries, for my component A, you could have an array. And first you could have an object that was just the default styles that always apply. Then you could have a series of conditions here that are using these little helper functions to say, hey, when the screen width is a minimum of 375 pixels, apply these styles instead. We wanted to keep very close to React Native styling standards, just the standard API for that, but add a lightweight simple responsive design on top of that. And under the hood, this is implemented with just a simple data structure that's just a bit more cumbersome. You just have an array that has a function that's testing some passed-in properties, and then you have the styles that are returned. And these get merged down into the styles that are passed to React Native. So pretty straightforward. And let's look at the work that I had, these to-dos that I put together for things that I'd like to change as a result of using this in Shirley, my app. I'd like to be able to accept just an object instead of an array, so you can easily combine queried and non-queried styles. And I'll show this a bit more. We're going to use test-driven development to build this out, so I'll show this a bit more as we write out the examples. We want any array element in the list to be able to be an object instead of a query, so there's not this hard-coded approach like there is now, where element 0 is always the defaults, whether you have styles or not. So we're going to make things more flexible, more easy to understand, so there aren't edge cases. This screen with min function, I put together just a very simple version of it. I mean, it is going to be very simple regardless, but I would like to do it with test-driven development to make sure it handles all the edge cases we want. And we want to do more queries as well, more queries like screen with min. So we are going to use test-driven development as a result of this, and you may be wondering why. The main reason I wanted to use TDD here is that it's easier for me to think through edge cases, to make sure I've got all the cases and the possible scenarios covered. It's also easier to get one case working at a time as we code it. So let's give that a try and start coding this. We've got our editor here, we've got our terminal here. We're just on the main branch, so let me make sure I've got the latest version. Now we're going to create a branch. I've got a collaborator on this repo, and so I'm going to ask her to review the changes to see if she's good, as well as anybody else in the organization or on the web who's interested. You can feel free to chime in on this pull request as well. All right, so let's get going here. We're going to create a branch. We'll call this API improvements. Terrible name, but we're just getting started, so that's okay. And actually what we're going to do is going to rip out the entire body of the implementation and start from scratch. And I'll kind of show you why and how we're doing that. So we've got the test up here on the side. If we just use my little shortcut here to start the yarn test, it's going to open up use style queries, and we see we have two different scenarios about base styles and conditional styles. So I just want to rip everything out because the implementation of this is actually fairly complicated. There's a lot going on there. And I want to make sure, as we're going to test drive this, that it's the simplest possible scenario, the simplest possible setup we can have. After this point, once we've started it out with a nice TDD test, I won't do that again in the future, probably, is what I'm intending, but we'll do it for now. So let's just delete the tests and the style config, and let's just delete the contents of use style queries. We can always get back to it if we need it. I do think I'm going to need this, and so I'm going to comment that out, and I do think I'm going to need use style queries for sure. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need use window dimension, but I'll comment that out just to make sure in our test-driven development we get only what's necessary. So Jest is telling us, yes, we've confirmed you only have one test. You have no test, and you need one test. So we're going to start through here and go through our to-do list. First, I want to be able to accept just an object instead of an array so you can easily combine non-queried styles. So let's start TDDing this out, and let's start with the simplest possible scenario, which is actually going to be no styles applied. So I'm going to look at the list again here. We had style queries, and then under there we have an object, and then for a component, we have an array passed in. But let's start even simpler than that to really test drive this out from the simplest possible scenarios. So let's say, I don't know, is there context in Jest? I forget. Let's see, I've been in Ruby lately and I'm really enjoying the context. So let's check and see if there are, let's hide my toolbars. Let's see if there's a context in Jest. Gotta reload the page as always. Turn on Jest, please, and then Jest context. Describe. Nope, there's not a context, so that's fine. Describe. So for use style queries, we're going to say, I got to look in here to orient myself. Oh, we'll say an empty object, this sort of trivial case. When no styles are passed. And what should it do? What does it do? It returns, I'm trying to remember the API. It returns a plain styles object. Returns an empty style object. Oh, and I do need to remember here reminding myself of this library and how the tested library works. Is it just, am I testing it with just hooks or not? So let's take a look and see. No, I'm just calling this as a normal function. This is in fact a React hook, and so there's some conventions around how it's used, but we don't need to worry about that for the sake of these tests. It can just be called as a plain function. So we'll say styles equals use style queries empty object. And we're going to say expect styles to equal, and I'm going to check to make sure that when it does the equality of that object, that it really is ensuring it is an empty object. So we'll just check it out and see. So we save the file, which is going to run the test. We expected an empty object back, but we're getting back undefined. So let's make this test pass. In the test-driven development cycle, it's called red-green refactor, where first you make the test, have a failing test, red, then you make it pass, green, then you look to see if there's any refactoring to do. All right, so we can just say, I'm going to keep this as a function keyword function because we know we're going to need a lot of lines. To make this pass, all I need to do is return a hard-coded empty array. And actually, I'm going to comment out the style config just to satisfy the linter. And we return that hard-coded array. It does, in fact, pass. Now, I want to make sure that this is strict enough. So let's say if we say foo bar as contents in here, is that going to make the test fail? And I believe it will. It does. So this expecting styles to equal empty object actually fails if there's extra keys that aren't expected. So this test is confirming that if we get an empty object in, we're getting an empty object out. So that was a very simple case. So let's move on from there. Do I want to make a commit? Yeah, let's just do separate commits here for each test case. Empty, no styles case. So what is sort of the next scenario we can think of? Let's go back to the README. And I've not been working in this library day to day, so I'm reminding myself about the API. So next we could say we have a component, a style passed in, and now we're not going to go into the complexity of the array here. One of the things we want to do is accept just an object instead of an array so that you can have some things that don't have style queries and conditions around it. So this is really a pass-through functionality to get pass-through React Native style functionality. So we can say describe when a single style object is passed for a style name. I feel like I might be using these terms like style name incorrectly, so I might even reword these a little bit later. So let's say it returns the passed in style object unchanged. So const plain styles equals, just do something that is in fact a valid React Native styles. We're going to say const result equals use style queries. Actually, let's write this out a bit, put more in this structure. This will actually be my component. So the styles is for my component, the font size should be 16. So we pass in style queries plain styles. We say expect result to equal plain styles. So if we pass in a normal style object without our array for adding these extra conditions, it should come out just as is. So let's save this and see what happens. Go back to my tab that has the test. This says that we expected to get those plain styles back, but in fact we got the empty object, and that's because we hard-coded that. So that makes sense. Now we need to implement this. So what we can do, we can get our style config, and we can say, a lot of times in TDD, you'll actually just check the condition, add a conditional, even if it collapses down. But I think here it's simple enough, and I'm not positive how to do that logic on a JavaScript object. I'm just going to say we're going to return the style config. And I think this is going to satisfy both of these scenarios, both an empty style and a style that's just plain. We save it, and it passes. We're good to go. Is there anything to refactor? Well, I kind of already refactored by just returning that unchanged, so there's not much to change there. Now, we've had a test here that has a single style. We do want to make sure that the object, that our style queries handles multiple styles coming in. And I think rather than having a separate test for that, let's just refactor this test to have two different things coming in. That's going to just make this test a little bit more robust. And we'll do that before we commit it. My component A, my component B, font size 16, font size 22. And we're going to check still to make sure that those plain styles come out the other side. Something I'll often do in test-driven development is I'll say to myself, here's my theory of what's going to happen when I save this, and I see if it succeeds or fails as expected. So I'm going to save. Oh, I forgot to say the theory. My theory was, in fact, that it would pass, and sure enough, it did. So I think we're good. Let's commit this case. We'll say pass through unconditional styles. So what is next? So the next bit of complexity we could have in our approach here is to have an array under a component. And let's do an empty array, because I think that should be valid. We really should make as few assumptions as possible. And so even though it would be unlikely to want to pass an array as the styles for a component, let's make sure the app doesn't blow up and that it just behaves in a sensible way. So we'll say describe when an empty array is passed for a style name, it returns an empty style object. So empty array gets turned into empty style object. So let's, I'll look at that and copy paste. I like saying result actually for the output here. Const result. Yeah. Equals use style queries. You pass in, no, that's not right. I need to keep reminding myself of the way the object works with components under it. So we'll say, I'm gonna say input. I haven't decided how I want to standardize the variable names throughout all of this, so maybe we'll refactor the test to make those more consistent later. Okay, my component A, empty array. We pass in the input, a component with an empty array, the result. We should expect the result to equal my component A, empty object. Because this whole array, passing an array to styles is something that's specific to this library. It's a new thing we're adding to enable the kind of flexibility we have in the README. But we need to turn this into a format that React Native expects with the flattened down style object for each component. And so array in, object out would be the next good case to have. Let's save it. My theory is that this will fail returning an array instead of the object. And it does fail. Our other tests are still passing. When we see this one test says it failed because we expected my component A with an object, but we got my component A with an array. So now we're in a situation where we can't just pass in the input as is. We need to do some looping and some conditionals. And because I don't want to use a JavaScript utility library like I usually do in application code. Instead, we're going to have to get familiar with how to work with objects in JavaScript. And we've got our documentation ready to do that. So how do we handle this case of if, so we got the object here, and for key, if the value is an array, return an object instead. I think what we can do is, a common pattern is to take a JavaScript object, convert it into a set of key value pairs, do some transformations, and then turn it back into an object instead. And I know how to do that in Lodash, so let's find out how to do that in JavaScript. Instead, I think what I can do is cheat by looking at the code we previously had. So let's take a look and do that. Might prevent a little stumbling. Object.entries to get the pairs. You can see I get style entries, and it's key and style clauses. And then in the end, we do object from entries. And there's some JavaScript version things with two entries, object.entries and object.from entries. I think they work fine in React Native, but we can double check that afterwards. So, you know what I'm going to do right now actually though is I want to make a change to this to be able to get this test passing. So to do that, I'm going to refactor what we already have. And I'm going to disable this test temporarily so that we can get to green, so that refactor can happen under green. So I think in Jest I can do xDescribe, and it works. So we have two passing tests and one skipped test. So we're now going to refactor this functionality to keep these two tests passing, but better prepare us for the next scenario. So I think what I'm going to do, and I'm going to create temporary variables here. We may collapse those down later, but just to write it out. So we'll say entries equals object entries style config. And then we're going to say result equals object from entries, and return result. Of course, this is silly to do on its own, but we're going to add a step in here that says transform the entries. Transform the entries. So that's where that transformation can happen. Now that we have this array, we could loop over. But let's leave that out for now. Let's save. And my theory is that these tests will continue to pass because this does not change the result that's outputted the other side. It is a new object in memory, but it doesn't change the contents of it. It should still be equal. And it works. It passes. All right, so let's commit this refactor. Refactor to prepare for value transformation. It's not the most verbose commit messages in the world, but on the stream I have trouble concentrating on those. Maybe next time I can do better with that. So now that we've refactored that, we can uncomment this test again. We run it, and now it says, oh yeah, for this here, we're getting back the key that's correct, but we expected an object, and we got an array. Now that we've done the refactor, it's a bit easier to see how we can handle that. We could say const transformed entries equals, and then we will return those. We'll say entries.map. Let me check that code in here to see. Entries.map, and then we take the array of key and value, and array and key and value. So let's do that. So we'll say key, and we'll say style clauses. Sorry, I've got a little helper here with the pointer that seems to be causing problems with my keyboard shortcuts. Let me just quit out of that. That'll be less distracting. I'm going to just call this key and value for right now. I think that'll be simpler. So we got a key and a value, and then we say, oh, we need parentheses around this because this is taking an array and destructuring it. We can now say if value, and now again, because I don't have Lodash handy, I'm going to have to look up how best to detect if the value is an object. Let me just return, just to make sure this is still working, that we haven't broken anything else, return key and value, and then transform it back. We should still get the same failure. We do. But now we want to say an updated value. Updated value equals, well, we just say value, see that fail again. But now we want to change what that value actually is. And I think we say, let's do it as a let. If, and let's see how to detect this. We want to see how to detect if we have an array or an object. JavaScript, let's just Google it. I think there's an API. Array.isArray. Yeah, sure. Array.isArray value. And we return the object because we need an object instead. Else return value. So if it's an array, return an object. Otherwise, it's not an array. So far in our examples, it's an object instead. We're going to return that object. Oh, and it's not return. It's updated value equals. So we're mapping over these entries, sometimes transforming the value and sometimes not. And my theory is that is going to get this test to pass. So let's try it. And it does. So we have here where in our values and our object here, when they're objects, they pass through unchanged. And when they're arrays, we get an empty object instead. But we want more logic than that. So let's dive in deeper into array handling after we do a commit. Let's say transform empty array into empty style object. So that's fine. And if you join the stream, I guess you would have watched the recording from the start, but if you join the stream, we're test driving out a new implementation of this React Native Style Queries library that's going to give us a nicer API for doing responsive design in React Native. So what's our next scenario here? Because the empty object to empty array to empty object isn't that useful. Clearly, we're going to need more functionality in our code than this. So let's see if we can refactor first, actually. Is there anything we can refactor here? Well, I'm actually pretty sure we're going to be able to return this object from entries here. I doubt that result is going to be something we're going to need. So I'm just going to make that small refactoring, and I'm going to commit that. Inline. I'm going to inline the temp variable. Okay. So what's the next scenario here? Well, we could have a style array here that only has one object under it. So let's try that. Oh, let me not copy paste. Let me write it out. When a style array has just one object, it returns that style object directly. So instead of nested under the array. And so what do I mean? I mean, if we have an input here and it says my component A, array, object, font size 16, and then we say, let's get the result, and this should be font size 16 directly into there. I'm going to save it to get that auto formatting. Apparently in this library I don't have spaces formatted for my linter. This does fail. I want to think about this though, because in this test, so yeah, we're showing that our array wrapping here, when it's still not needed, we're starting from the simplest cases here. We still haven't gotten anything useful, which is something that can be discouraging about test-driven development. But by handling the simplest cases first, we're building up towards more advanced cases. So this is not adding value yet, other than just translating to something that works with React Native's built-in styling. And it's failing because we haven't implemented it yet. But I want to think through this. Do we want this test to show a component B as well to show that that one's in there? If we had a second entry, we would need to either just have an object or have an array like this, and should it be an empty object? All these questions get raised. There are judgment calls in test-driven development. I don't believe I'm going to break the code that causes me to not handle multiple keys correctly. I believe that's going to work fine. So for a lot of these tests, I'm just going to have a single entry in there from here. So I think just the single my component A, and in fact, I'll just call it my component. I think that'll be fine. I'm not worried about breaking that code. All right, so use style queries here. How can we get this test to pass? What we're saying is, if a key has a value that's an array, that array just has one object under it, return it. In fact, I think we could even go more general and just say if it just has one thing under it, return it. And we can add conditionals in the future only when is necessary. So we could say here, okay, if it's an array, instead of returning an empty object, we can say if value.length is greater than 0, and we don't want to add more complexity than is warranted by our tests. So we'll say if value.length is well, let me say it this way. This makes it a little more obvious. If value.length is 0, updated value should be empty object. Else, updated value equals value 0. So give me the first element. If there's no elements in the array, give me an empty object. Otherwise, give me the first element in the array. And my theory is that this will cause all the tests to pass. And it does. Good luck so far. I'm sure I'm going to make a mistake one of these times. So let's commit this. We'll say return single style from object in array. Return single style object from array. Okay, so that passes. So I think I'm close to wanting to give names to this because all these values, updated value equals value 0, is starting to confuse me. So it'll be easier once we have more things in here, but let's try to give these names. So there's a key, and actually the key is a style name. So let's call that style name. That's a nice refactoring, and we'll just keep the test running to make sure everything is still fine. For this value here, it could be a style object or array. And the fact that it could be both, I kind of want to reflect in here. So let's get that passing. That passes. And then updated value is not the most helpful. It's really the flattened style for that style name. So the key is we might have a style object, actually a flattened style object. So we might be getting a style object or array, and then we want to return a flattened style object. So we save there. And so let's read this logic to see if it's more understandable. We're determining what the flattened style object is. If the style object or array is an array, then we check the length of it. And if it's 0, we return an empty object. Otherwise, we return the first element of style object or an array. In cases like this, I always don't know whether to rename the variable in line. Let's do it. I think that'll be helpful. Even if we take that out later, it'll be helpful for understandability as we're building this. So we'll say const style array equals style object or array. And then here we'll just say, yeah, so style array. If style array length is 0, return then assign the empty object. Otherwise, style array at index 0. And just this simpler name helps me to understand what's going on here. And then here we could even say const style object equals style object or array. And then we say flattened style object equals style object. So that works. But I think even with this simplicity here, I think we can even collapse this down further. We just need the style object coming out of this. The single style object. That might get confusing though once we have multiple style objects in the list. So I'm going to leave it, even as silly as this code as silly as this code looks, I'm going to leave these few lines for right now because I think it'll prepare us for the future better, and we can always refactor there. But let's commit this refactoring. Improve names in implementation. So that's great. When a style array has just one object, it returns that style object directly. So what's the next most complex case? I think it would be when a style array has 2 style objects. We want to flatten them down. And I think I am going to copy and paste it this time. Has 2 style objects. We haven't even gotten yet to the conditions, the queries that are the core of this library, but we're building out to it by handling all these simpler cases. And when I spiked this out and wrote the initial implementation, I didn't handle any of these. And this is why the code was kind of like, had this strange requirement of array. It has to be an array element this has to be that, and all this confusing stuff. So, by testing these, we are making the code more robust. So when a style array has 2 style objects, it returns the style objects merge with later objects taking precedence. Kind of verbose, but it's okay. So for my component, font size 16 and font size 22. So when the array has 2 objects like this, which one wins? And actually, thinking about this now, is this even something that we could leverage React Native's array handling? I don't think so, because I think when you have named styles like this, I think it's supposed to be a single style object. We can always change that later. If I find that that's different and we want to change the implementation, we can always change the tests. But for right now, I think it'll be most straightforward if we say it's going to flatten it down. And we're going to say the font size there is 22. I think one other thing, though, to make sure that this is working well is to have a property that comes through unchanged. And let me see what I used as an example for this. I think I did just use font size. Yeah. So let's do something else. Let's say color. Is that a React Native property? I want to find a real property. I'm in React on the web right now, and on my side project I only use component libraries. So let's make sure this library doesn't care about these properties. But any object could be passed through, but I do want to make this realistic. Style, color. Come on, man. Color, yes. Okay. All right. So color, blue. And then say, so this is now going to be a property that we don't override, and so we make sure that comes through. Color blue. Yeah, so I think this test covers what we want to happen. We save, we see this fail, we see that blue 16 was returned. So only the first style object was returned. They weren't merged down. And so we want to add that merging. So this is where our naive code so far needs to be handled better. Flatten style objects, and then we have style array here. So there's a lot going on in this function, but let's get it passing before we consider extracting any child functions, because that we may get more as we go through time here. So I'm going to cheat again and see how I handled this in the previous code for the application. There's the predicate stuff, but then we said, I used reduce, where reduce I can never remember exactly how it works, but in cases like this, it could actually be valuable. Is that right? Because yeah, we start with we start with the first object. In our case, we could probably just start with an empty object for some. We better keep it simpler. Okay, my brain is going a couple different directions here. So reduce. Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? We should, especially because I'm confusing myself, we should go with the simplest possible approach here. Here's another thing I saw. I'm using double equals in JavaScript, and I'm surprised my linter doesn't handle that. So I'm going to stash these changes for a minute. I'm going to make sure triple equals is passing. It is. I'm going to add myself a to-do. Set up linter to disallow double equals. Cool. All right. Git stash pop. All right. So I actually want to say else if style array length greater than 1, and then we'll say flatten style object equals the style array 0, style array 1. So we're going to spread those two objects out with the later one winning. And I'm hoping that will make these pass. I believe it will. It does. And I'm remembering here that our case here says when it has two style objects, this is what happens. And so we've handled the to case. So let's commit that. Merge two style objects. So now, okay, what's going to make this code not good enough? Well, having 2 is fairly limiting. What if we had 3? So let's have 3. Has 3 style objects. Turns all style objects merged. So let's kind of go from here. Let's do we'll do color red here. Now that could fail in a weird way. What is the, my brain with the 2 dimensions of things going on here, my brain kind of struggles to think of what's the simplest case. Let's do font family Arial. And then we'll say font family times New Roman to get a really old school web look to our React Native app. So wonderful, so beautiful. So what we want the styles to be in the end is color blue, font size 22, font family times New Roman. That all of those would be merged. So this will only pass if all of them are being merged together. So let's save, and the test should fail. They do. So this is the red part of our red-green refactor. So we see that our third object is not being accounted for at all. So how can we get this to pass? We could add another condition here to add that object in, but we want this to work for any number of objects here. So now is where we need to do an actual reduce, or something like that, some kind of loop. So let's do it with a reduce. And I don't trust myself to do a reduce in general, but without, correctly, but with test coverage here, I think I can test it. I think I can get it right. Let's pull up dev docs to pull up array reduce to remind myself. I do look up the signatures only, which makes me think that maybe I should be using TypeScript. Maybe that would be helpful. reduce previous value, current value. Is that array.reduce? Oh, this is an interesting way to write this out, as though it was a standalone function instead of called on the array. So let's say here, style array.reduce, and we're taking in, oh yeah, the reducer is the one object, so previous value, current value. I actually like that written out more than the accumulator and stuff like that. So what do we want back from here? Actually, I think we can probably, no, just to keep it flexible, let's just do a curlies for a second, and we can refactor it later if we want. So what we want is, for everything in here, we take previous value. Hang on a second. Yeah, we're accumulating the objects. The previous value is an object. We spread it. We spread the current value. And I think I remember this from my cheating version of the previous implementation. So the flattened style object. I'm not sure what what Visual Studio Code is telling me. Oh, it's linting. Okay, well, maybe it'll take out the curlies for us. I think this will work. We save, and it passes. It put it on a separate line. That's good. Okay, so if it's that simple, let's take out the curly, and let's just put parens around that. So it's an arrow function that returns the value as an expression. Cool, so the flattened style object just goes through the array, and it squashes in all the values, making sure that the later ones win. So we're passing. So let's commit this. We'll say handle any number of style objects. All right, we've got style objects. So I think it's now finally time to do something useful. And that is the derogatory to TDD way of saying it. What's useful we've done so far is handle edge cases. So that's really nice. Handle simpler cases. Now we're at the point where we're doing more complex cases. And it can be helpful to do a spike. Sorry, I'm kind of down low on the video here. Let me come up a little higher. It can be useful to do a spike to let me code the complex case just to see if that works well. And then if so, to come back and test drive it. And so we're test driving it now. So now we're saying handling cases where we have these conditions, which is to say actually these conditions underneath. So let's handle one of those. And this will get us close to a good stopping point for the stream if we run out of time. We'll say describe when a style array has one condition. Let's just get a single condition in before we handle any of the combinations to see what's needed. We say it, and here we're going to do nested describes, nested again, when the condition is true. Actually, let's say when the condition is false first, because that's simpler. And we'll say it returns an empty style object. Because if the only styling is a condition and the condition is false, we get an empty style object back. So this will be good. Okay, so input. What are we saying here in case you don't have this in your mind? We say my component, as usual. We've got a style array. And here we have this conditional structure where the first element is the condition and the second element is the styles. So we say here, and I'm going to write it in the format that I'm expecting. Well, we'll see. The auto formatter may format it differently. But we say false. So this is a silly condition that always returns false. And we'll say color red. We should get red back if there's a problem. So now we'll say const result equals use style queries input. And we say expect result to equal my component empty object. Because what we're saying is in the definition of the interface for this class, if we have an array of styles, and if one of the elements of that array is another array, so it's a condition, and I did that just to keep the syntax as short as possible, where if you are writing it out by hand, and the condition is false, then we don't get the style back. Don't return the style if it's false. Return the empty object instead, if there's no other styles. So we'll save this and see what happens. It might blow up spectacularly. So actually here, we're getting returned back the array that has the function in it. So that's definitely not what we need going to React Native. So let's now handle this case. So we're getting the style name and the style object or array. We're getting the style array, and then we're reducing. Oh, now I immediately regret using this expression approach because we do need conditionality here instead. So, oops. Let us comment this out to get the test passing again, and then I'm going to refactor this back. You know, some people say just always use the curlies, and maybe I should just get there. Okay, so going back to these curlies is helpful, and I'm just going to amend that onto the previous commit. All right, so now we have space in this multi-line function here to do something. So we want to say, no, we don't always want to squish. Oh, wait. Style array element. What the heck am I doing? No, hang on, let me go figure it. So style name, my component. Style object or array, array. If array is array, okay, it's style array. Style array length is 0. Oh yeah, I know. I see what's happening. So we have, again, this structure is a little confusing. We have an array of style conditions. We have the array that is the first condition. And what we're getting out is just the first condition. So let me paste that in so we can see it. Probably turning true. Serializes the same. Okay, so it's something about the function. Never mind, that's not helpful. So we are getting is the previous value? I'm confusing myself, so I need to understand what's happening in the code first. If the length is 0, no, it's this. Flat. If the length is 1, greater than 1, we're getting this. So I'm remembering that we could have actually refactored this out before. We probably should to avoid confusion. So let me, this confusion that I'm getting. So I'm going to go back to this, go back to here. I think now with these other tests we have, I think this condition is not needed because I think this reduce will handle this as well. So let's make these changes in 2 steps. We'll say first if the length is greater than 0, because I think this logic handles this case as well. And I think this will keep the test passing. They do. So I think since we've said since style array length is greater than 0, I think we don't need this condition because it'll always pass, it'll always catch. And so therefore I think this can just be an else. So if the length is 0, do that, else do this. And in fact, this might work with this scenario as well. But let's commit these refactors first. Remove unneeded condition. And let's see if I remove the condition entirely, if this just works. I think it might not. It does not. Reduce of empty array with no initial value. So I think we can handle that by having the default value in the reduce be the empty object. And I think that'll handle the others as well because that collapses into here. Let's just see. It does. Okay. That looks good. Just because of the syntax of reduce making it a bit hard to see, I'm going to say, actually that to-do is no longer needed. Oh well, hopefully I'll get that linter set up one of these days. Let's say initial value equals that. That. So this is using the variable name to document the usage rather than a comment. And that works. So we've actually removed all the conditionality in there. And now we don't need this curly, but I've been burned by that already. So let me commit this again. Collapse remaining conditional into reducer default value. Okay. So, okay, now we need to re-enable our test here. And now we're getting a different result. So now instead of my component being an empty object, we have an object where 0 is function anonymous and 1 is object color red. That looks worse because something weird is happening. I think it's because we're taking the array in here and spreading it into this object. But that's okay because we need to add the condition here. So what we can do is do another check on current value here. And let's say if isArray current value, return foof, else, and that's just a placeholder value. so we can see it blow up and confirm that we're reaching that branch. So let's save it. Yes, so in this scenario, in this one test, we're hitting this branch and we're getting my component foof back instead. And so now the test is telling us what we want instead. For what we've tested so far, we just want an empty object here. And you might be able to tell, maybe you can follow this very well or maybe not, but I'm having trouble following all the complexity here. I do have the API in my head that may be an advantage over you, but like exactly what logic we need and like exactly how this reduce is working out and what's a different level of the function, I'm having trouble following. And so I really, really like in this case, TDDing one case at a time and just adding a little more sophistication. Sometimes that can feel forced in TDD exercises, but I think it's really useful in this case. I'm going to save this scenario here, and now we have the test passing. And say we'll let's commit this. We'll say handle false condition in style query. And now we're good. So we know this is not enough for all the functionality we need, because just returning that hard code is not good. Well, what test do we need to drive out our next bit of behavior? What we need is the true case. So I'm going to do this. Copy and paste. When the condition is true, it returns the query's style object. And this is one of the downsides of using single quotes. But let's just do that. So if we say condition is true, color red, we should get back color red. So my theory of what's going to happen when we save this is that we're going to get the empty object back instead, because we're not checking the condition. And we do get the empty object back. So this should be fairly easy to make pass compared to the last one. So we say if the array is a current value, now let's pull out the values of it. We'll say, I think previously I used the word predicate. Let's see if that's the case. That's drawing on my Ruby background as well. Predicate and conditional style object. I like those names, so I'm just going to take those over. So predicate and conditional style object. So if this value is an array, it means we mean to have these two different things here. And so then we want to say if predicate, that's a function that we're calling, and if that's true, we return conditional style object. Otherwise, we return the empty object. And that's so either the conditional style object or the empty object. Oh, I don't think that's right, actually. I think we want the previous value. Let's put previous value there. I kind of feel like there's some duplication in how this all works, because actually I think here we need not the conditional style object. I think we are including the conditional style object in with the previous value. So previous value is always used, but we may add in the current value or the conditional style object. I think this will make the test pass. I think I'm definitely going to want some refactoring after this. So let's save it. The tests do pass. Let's commit it, because I could see myself messing this up. Handle true predicate. So now, how can I remove this duplication of previous value? Because I think this will be a good thing to remove. I think we're not going to regret that. We say, I think we want another temporary value here. So let styles to merge. Let's start it as null. We'll say if predicate styles to merge is conditional style object. And in fact, we just won't even need the else clause. And we'll say here, styles to merge equals current value. And then let's default it to the empty object. I think actually we could even simplify that further. But then down here we say, okay, we always return the previous value with the styles to merge merged in. I think that will make the test, keep the test passing. They do. I don't know if I love creating a new object every time. It's maybe premature optimization to get rid of that, but I kind of want to. And let's see if we can do that easily. I think we can just say styles to merge is null. So we say if styles to merge, return that, but otherwise return previous value. So we're returning the previous value unchanged, and we avoid allocating another object. I wouldn't always do this in application level code, but for a library that'll get used a lot and called a lot, that seems valuable. So let's commit this. Refactor to remove duplication of style merging. So at this point, only one place in here do we show merging in the previous value. Yeah, so that's nice. So what do we have remaining? We're close to the end of the time. I can go a little long because some of my family is out visiting the in-laws right now. I think we're going to go another few minutes because I think we're close to done. I think we can pretty much finish this. I see a few viewers have jumped on. Hello. As you haven't caught from before, we're working through this styling library for React Native that I've worked on with a coworker to handle these conditionals, to be able to conditionally say when the screen width is a minimum size, apply this styling. And we're going through and gradually building up the functionality to be as flexible as possible. So let's add another few cases because I think we're very close, and some of these tests might even pass already. I do see we're not using window dimensions yet, so we don't yet have actually pulling in real conditions from React Native itself. So maybe that will be left as an exercise to the reader, or maybe I'll do another stream soon. I don't think we need to get to an endpoint. This is just to demonstrate the TDD process. I'll link to the completed PR, and you can see the commit history if you want to check this out later. So yeah, let's add one or two more conditions before we're done for the day. So when a style array has one condition, when the condition is false and when the condition is true. So far you can see we haven't actually tested out passing anything into those functions. And we're going to need that. We're going to need it to be able to use the window dimensions. So I'm going to add myself a reminder in a test here so that I don't forget to do that. And then we'll come back. And I forget to how to do that in Jest. So let's see if I can find out. Pending. Jest pending tests. I think it was a to-do is what they actually call it. To-do. Test.todo. Okay. Describe.todo. Arguments to conditional function. Starting with window width. So let's see. Test run, describe.todo is not a function. Okay, let's just call that test.todo. I can do it.todo as well. It just shows up as a to-do. So that's cool. That's kind of nice to record that in the test. So record to-do of arguments to conditionals. So what I want to do instead of these to wrap up for the evening is to handle, or to make sure we're handling, multiple arguments being passed. So when a style array has one condition is our block right here. And let's say describe when a style array has, let's say, an object and a condition. So that kind of combination seems the most straightforward. I don't think I need multiple nested describes because I've handled the false and the true here. I think it's just going to be it. Do I need to do that? I think I want that at least once. So I'm going to copy both of these. When the condition is false, it returns, and let me say, an object followed by a condition. The condition is false, it returns the style object. So this is going to be in this array, and this is starting to feel more like what you'd actually see. Color blue. Let's say color green, because it's supposed to get green. Yeah, so when we've got color green and then we've got a false conditional that would override it with red, we expect green to come out. It's not TDD to do both of them at once, so let me do one at a time. All right, when the conditional is false, it returns the style object. Let's save, let's see what happens. This actually passes already. Now, some folks would say in TDD that if a test passes already, then that's a problem, you've done it wrong. I feel like pragmatically in projects, you're writing out one scenario at a time, and if the test has driven you to the point that this case is already needed, great. It may still be part of the public interface of your code you want to make sure is covered. So let's make sure it makes sense that this is being handled when we have an object and then a false conditional. So we've got the style array doing a reduce. We're starting with the initial value of the empty object, which could maybe be optimized out, but whatever. So previous value, empty object. Current value is, excuse me, current value is the object. We say, oh, it's not an array. It's just the styles to merge in, and we merge it in. We merge the object in. Then we loop through again. The next element is the is an array. So we get the predicate, we evaluate it, make sure it is covered, and because it doesn't pass, styles to merge stays empty, we don't merge it in. So that makes sense. It makes sense that passes. I'm going to go ahead and add the other condition as well. When the condition is true, it merges the conditional styles into the object. So if we say it starts red and then should turn green if the condition is true, then we should expect green to be coming out the other side. Save, and it does in fact work. So I'm just going to commit that we record or we're handling these cases. Cover object with condition scenario. Okay, so let's put a few more cases covered here. I think it's going to be fairly. What am I saying? I think probably the other cases to cover in here are going to be fairly straightforward. We have a single condition, object and condition. Let's do two conditions. Has multiple conditions. And so it's not just going to be when one condition is false. Just for thoroughness, I'd like to say when only the first condition true, it returns the first condition's style. So we say in here, okay, we're going to do... Sorry, the auto formatter here is not actually being helpful, unfortunately. It's one of the few cases that I don't prefer what Prettier does. So, okay, when only the first condition is true, we do green and then false. So true should give us green, false should not give us red, so we should get green coming out, and that does in fact work. I'm going to add multiple conditions here and say when only the second condition is true, it returns the second condition style. So we'll say false red, true green, and we should still get green, and we do. Let's just go ahead, just to really specify this, let's say when neither condition is true, returns an empty style object. Dark red, we get empty object and we get it, and then let's just do both true as well. When both conditions are true, returns, we're going to need to say merge here. It merges the conditions styles. Both true. So we'll say color green, font size 16, and then font size 22. So we should get color green and font size 22. We got the merging functionality, and I think that will work. So let's cover this. Test multiple conditions. Cool. So that's working. Maybe let's just do one more test. And again, this is not strict TDD based on people that would say that. But let's just try one more. And let's change this, say, 2 conditions to specify that. One more kind of crazy case that says describe a style array has a mix of objects and conditions. And we're not going to test lots of different scenarios. We're just going to say it merges all objects and true conditions. Not writing this the most precise way possible. But, okay, let's copy and paste it. So let's start, So we have other cases where we start with an object. So let's start with a conditional. Let's start conditional true green, font size 16. We'll say font size 22 is an object. We'll go with a false condition and do color red, just so we know not to look for it. And then we'll do another true condition. We'll do font family Arial here. We're going to say font family times New Roman. But we definitely don't want Papyrus. I know Papyrus and Comic Sans are both I don't even know the name of the game. That's how old I am. How is that game? It's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. I know Megalovania. Anyways, whatever game that is, please help me to be relevant to today's youth. So yeah, anyways, let's just move on from that. And let's add one more object in for good measure. Let's do color green. That's what we want here. So let's say the initial color is yellow because we're not sure if it's good or not. So what we expect to come out the other side is color green from there. Font family times New Roman from there. And font size 22 from there. Yeah, that's fine. Undertale, that's the name of the game. Okay, I think this is going to all pass, and it does. So this is closer to what I expect. Actually, I mean, to be honest, in most cases, what I expect is going to happen is you're going to start with one object and you have a series of conditionals after it. That's typical. But one of the things that I found actually when I was coding this out is that it was frustrating not to be able to do my component, say this was my component B, my component A, and just have this one be unconditional and just say, oh, this is just color yellow. So I wanted, I mean, really the whole motivation for doing this rewrite work was to be able to say, hey, in the input here to use style queries, I want the simple unconditional one, and then I want this one that has a set of defaults and override conditions and stuff like that. And so we've now got that. That's working really well. So let's undo this and get back there. And this is passing. So it is not passing. What have I done? No, I've removed some things, so let me get back. Cool. Okay. All right, looks good. So we do have our to-do. We have to add arguments to the conditional function to get to the point that we're actually using that window width as before. Oh, we could do some refactoring of this as well. Let me spend just a minute to do that before I finish. Text my significant other to let her know that I'm going to go for 5 more minutes. Always keep your family in the loop. Great. Okay, so a refactor. I think we're at the point where we can already remove this because adding in the processing of handling conditions to the predicate is going to be very specialized to here. So what refactoring can we do? Well, by waiting this long, we've allowed a structure of this function to emerge. And I don't know, let's look at the size of things. Size of things is not always the reason to pull things out. And I'm from a object and code design background that really likes to have very small decomposed functions, but I don't want to overly extract that at this point, but just things that are big. So whatever big things in our structuring, we've got mapping over the entries. So each of those is a single style. Flattened style object. So we haven't really changed anything out there for a while. But once we get down to here, this is where it's starting to get to something specific to our app, where we say, if it's an array, do some magic, otherwise just pass it through. And actually, that's pretty trivial. So really, it's maybe the handling of the array here where things are significant. So let's pull out a function there to say style array. We could say function flatten style array. Pass in a style array. Yeah. So let's copy all this over. So we don't need to do that reassignment. This is done here. And then we assign to flattened style object, but really it's, I guess we could say const and then return flat style object. I'm torn sometimes when I have a long reduce or something like that, whether to return directly or have a temporary variable. And probably this will get refactored out at some point as well. But yeah, if we're having the reduce here, capturing the reduce in one place with the initial value and everything, like that seems good to pull out. So let's see here, flatten style array, flatten style object, flatten style array, And in fact, we can even, let's leave that for now. My theory is that I've extracted this right, and then if we save this, the tests will work. And they do pass. So I have confidence, because we've built up a thorough test suite using TDD, that the fact test pass means this is still working. And let's see if I like this. Up in use style queries, we go over the entries, and for each one we see if it's an array, flatten it, otherwise keep it as is. And then when we're flattening it, we call down to here, we're going over an array and reduce it. Here is something where I think we may pull out even more logic in the future, but I think that's okay for now. This is easy enough to follow. Here's a style array, and what do I handle as I go through that style array? So I can follow that. But I think now that we've pulled that functionality out, we can simplify this even further. I think we can say if array is array, flatten style object, or array. By passing this in here, it gets renamed to style array down there. So not having that temporary variable for one line, I think, is fine. And here we say flatten style object is style object or array. So we're basically saying the flattened style object is either the thing by itself or the flattened version of it. So let's save this and see if that works, and it does. I mean, this could turn into a ternary, but I don't think that's useful. That probably will hinder readability. So we say we get the entries, we map over them, we either flatten it or not, depending on if it's an array, and then we turn it back into an object. So that's a really nice responsibility. Like use.queries is saying, we go through the entries in here and we flatten some of the values if necessary. And this describes how we flatten those values, including checking for plain objects and checking for arrays. This can maybe be pulled out further. Let me commit this refactoring at least for sure. We'll say extract flatten style array function. Am I confident enough about handling this predicate? I mean, it's short enough now that it's not clear what's needed. So I think I would want to wait until the implementing of this to do. I could theorize that I want to pull this out, but I want to see it first. It's going to be best if we see it first. And I certainly couldn't have decided up front that this is the right abstraction to pull out. So I like to wait until the tests guide me there. Cool. All right. So I'm going to push this branch up to the repo. I'm not going to open a pull request yet because I do want to finish this to do to get the arguments to the conditional function, because I want to maintain the current functionality. We want to get that functionality back in there, and even before I've been able to run it in the example repo. But this has been good progress. So thank you for joining me, the folks who hopped on the stream and anyone watching this recording later. I hope you followed as far as the complexity of what this library is trying to do to get this conditionality in here, to get this nice API. As we went through the TDD process, we saw that we started with really the most trivial edge cases, and it took a while to build it up to the point where we handled the main cases we were expecting to handle in the library. And that's a bit surprising. And yet, by building up the simpler cases first, we were able to gradually build out the structure of this code that would have been very hard to write from scratch, and certainly to get a nice, readable, understandable approach. If you understand a problem well enough that you can write that from scratch, that's really great, but I often don't. So this is helpful to me to go through. You saw that we refactored as we went, made changes to improve names and organization of the code based on the confidence that the test gave us as they were passing. And you saw that, for me, hopefully you saw, I felt for sure, that I was solving one problem at a time. Oh, how do I get this reduce working? Oh, what am I looking for here to check? And this, rather concise syntax that we're looking to do here for this library for styling, we were able to build up the code that would handle it well step by step. So, yeah, thank you again for joining. I'll put the link to the pull request in the video description here, so you could check that out, checking this out afterwards to see what final work came in to put in these conditionals and get this merged, and any pull request feedback. Anyone, feel free to chime in, whether it's been merged in already, with your thoughts and questions. But I hope this was interesting. And again, just to wrap up, in January, I'm going to be starting a series converting another application of mine to use React Native Web. Let me pull it up. It's GitHub, coding it wrong, Firehose API. So this is the repo for it. Well, this is a Rails backend for the Firehose app, and we've got a front end that's built in Ember.js. We're going to be converting it to React Native Web, so that just like in the examples that I was showing you, where we were running the same application on the web and on mobile, we're going to be able to run this link sharing app on web and on mobile as well. We're going to be using React Native style queries to get some nice effects, like this nice realignment of buttons here on small versus larger sizes, and a ton of other things to get a great look and feel on the web and on mobile. So I hope you join me in January. Follow me on Twitch, and the link will be in the description if you'd like to get a notification of when that's coming. Or go to codingitwrong.com to check out any other ways you can follow me. There's my blog, there's an RSS feed. You can follow me on Mastodon, the open source social network. Follow me on YouTube, LinkedIn, all these other different scenarios. But yeah, I would love to have you connect with me. I think we're going to have a lot of fun building out some cool stuff on React Native Web. Thank you for anyone who joined on the stream, for letting me try this out, make sure my setup was working well, get back into the habit of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all in January. If you celebrate any holidays during this season, I hope you enjoy the holiday time with friends and family, and we'll catch you in January. Take it easy. Thanks.